welcome everybody for the
Hello and welcome. Good evening, all of you. I welcome all of you to our 13th webinar. It's a book discussion on China versus US, who will prevail. It's a book written by Ambassador Alfredo Toro Hardy, and it's a very relevant and interesting topic, given the happenings in the current time. So first, I'll just start with a brief introduction of Ambassador Hardy, and then we can proceed with the webinar. Okay? Ambassador Hardy is a former Venezuelan ambassador to US, UK, Spain, Brazil, Singapore, Chile, and Ireland. He's also the visiting professor at Princeton, Brasilia, and Barcelona. He's a two-time Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Center's resident scholar, and he is the author and the co-author of 35 books and peer-reviewed papers on international affairs. Yes, and now I'll begin with the main theme of the book. Yes. So without wasting much of time, we'll request Ambassador Hardy to start with. Just give us a brief insight on what exactly his book is about. I'll begin with the two primary questions which you've been addressing in the book. Okay, that whether China has challenged the US too hard and too soon, which is going to hamper its own ascendancy. And second, is it too late for the US to contain China? Sir, please.
Yes. So essentially, I'll make an exposition about the book.
Yes. And then, so about for 30, 40 minutes, and then we'll have some few questions for you, 20 minutes question answer session.
Very good. Thank you so much. I'm very honored by your invitation, by your Sinus Foundation invitation. Well, my recently published book, China versus the US, Who Will Prevail, aims at answering two main group of questions. Did China challenge the United States too hard and too soon, and by doing so seriously affected the chance to attain its own objectives? And conversely, can Washington still contain China's ascendancy and retain its current leading status? Actually, few countries have made such a systematic and conscious effort to project a constructive international image as China did during the first years of the new millennium. From the conceptualization and promotion of the concept of peaceful rise to the foundation and dissemination of the Confucius Institutes around the world, to the launching of CCTV in English, few nations did indeed associate their image, their foreign policy, to soft power in such an efficient and deliberate manner. However, from 2008 onwards, the tone began to change in a significant manner as China's geopolitical stance became much more assertive. This muscular approach to foreign policy clearly intensified after Xi Jinping's arrival to power in 2013. Convergent strategies such as those represented by the China Dream of National Rejuvenation or Made in China 2025 reflect such aims. The first versus a powerful and prosperous China, the expansion of the country's geopolitical footprint, a focus on increased military power and military technology, and a change of China's strategic geography. The second, on its part, Made in China 2025, aims at transforming China into a world leader in science, technology, and innovation by the mid-21st century. Earlier, in 2017, China published its first ever white paper on China's policies on the Asia-Pacific region, in which it made clear its intention of establishing itself as the dominant power in Asia. The maps of the region that the Chinese now print show 90% of the South China Sea as theirs, China has undertaken an artificial island building spree in the South China Sea, while subsequently transforming those islands into fortresses armed to the teeth. Its assertiveness in relation with India have increased as well as its drive towards an Indian Ocean blue water navy presence, and we could go forward. Since 2014, China launched more submarines, warships, and other vessels than the total number of ships currently serving in the combined navies of Germany, India, UK, Spain, Taiwan, and Taiwan. The country is currently engaged in the most active ballistic and cruise missile program in the world, and so on and so forth. The question is, by heralding the country's ambition and boasting about its capabilities, while at the same time hardening its geopolitical and military positions, China unavoidably challenged the US primacy. And this has generated, as a result, a strong reaction by Washington, where a widespread consensus now pictures China in antagonistic terms. As a result, instead of sailing with the winds at its back, as used to be the case, now China is sailing against very powerful winds. However, for a country as obsessed as China has always been in continuously measuring its comprehensive national power, it would seem to be out of context to have provoked the United States' reaction if they have felt unprepared for such a measurement of forces. China's assertiveness may simply mean that according to its calculations, the country is now powerful enough to take that stand. Waging the comprehensive national power of both China and the US through a balanced power profile seems to be the best way to answer the two initial questions that I mentioned and that you presented at the beginning, meaning did China challenge the US too hard and too soon, and can Washington still contain China's ascendancy? In order to weigh the power profile of both countries, my book tries to ascertain how well they rank in 6 different aptitude categories. These are the Convergence Aptitude, the Strategic Aptitude, the Universality Aptitude, the Military Aptitude, the Economic Aptitude, and the Technological Aptitude. Let's briefly outline each of them. First, the Convergence Aptitude. This reflects the capability of both countries to rally others behind them. In the final phase of World War II, or in its aftermath, a network of multilateral organizations and alliances began to take shape under the stewardship of the US. A sophisticated multilateral system was therein structured under the auspices of the US. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the whole community of nations had to find a rearrangement under the American hegemony, which henceforward became global. The new millennium thus arrived under a set of global rules and ideological consistency that had no parallel in history. Inexplicably, under the light of common sense, George W. Bush administration arrived to government wanted to turn that state of things upside down. In this manner, they began to disarticulate precisely at the moment when it had reached its apex, a complex hegemonic structure that had taken decades to build. As a result, the Bush administration proclaimed the futility of multilateral cooperation, which in their eyes constrained the freedom of action to which American power was entitled. They said directly and brutally the prerogatives of the country's national interest. They made it clear that the overwhelming nature of US power exempted it from compliance with international norms. Fortunately, the US, the next tenant at the White House was Barack Obama, who was ready to take a totally different avenue. Obama seemed to have followed Richard Haas's prescription on the nature of power and on the nature of influence. According to Haas, power as an end in itself is not very helpful. What really counts is the possibility of turning that power into influence. In other words, power alone is simple potentiality. And the role of a successful foreign policy is to turn that potentiality into real influence. This became clear in the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in relation to Iran, in the newly created G20, or in the OTAN summits, among other instances. This achievement, this approach, very successful approach that Obama gave to America's foreign policy, was compromised, seriously compromised, with the arrival to power of Donald Trump, a president who was not only imbued with George Bush unilateralism, but curiously combined it with what appears to be a pre-Second World War isolationist approach to foreign policy. His administration practically abandoned all the initiatives undertaken by Obama under the banners of collective action and cooperative multilateralism. Trump has targeted Washington own allies in all kinds of manners under the assumption that national sovereignty and national interest can be the only foundations of international relations. As a result, close allies such as Japan, South Korea, Canada, Mexico, the European Union, even India, have all been affected. George W. Bush, followed 8 years later by Donald Trump, is simply too much for the allies and friends of America to handle. Indeed, America's allies have come to mistrust the country where their ideas have enjoyed of such a wide support. If a nation as close to the US as Germany can no longer trust it, as Angela Merkel said very clearly in Akisgram in May 2008, then who can? Where does China stand in terms of this convergence capacity? The answer is simple. China's unstoppable drive to a position of leadership in the expansion of globalization and the fact that it's the world's most interconnected country in terms of trade have simultaneously broadened its convergent capacity. The vital role played by China in a group of institutions and initiatives such as the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Silk Road Fund, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the Free Trade Area of the Asia Pacific, and very especially the Belt and Road Initiative have all played in favor of its aptitude to rally others in its back. China's nationalistic excesses have hampered, it's clear, to an important extent, this convergence capacity. However, it is reasonably to assume that its leading role in globalization has been able to shield China to an important extent from such excesses. This is consistent with the concept of geoeconomics, according to which the use of economic instruments allows to achieve also geopolitical aims. Number 2, the strategic aptitude. This aptitude relates to a capability of sustaining a steady and consistent course of action within a clear route map. As an established superpower which plays the geopolitical games in different fields, in different scenarios at the same time, the US the risks of distraction and dispersion are
पता कैसे आई
undoubtedly.
मैंने जब
Sorry,
ये ज्वाइन करो तो जब ये ब्लॉक
are more higher. Conversely, with the more localized and closer to home geopolitical ambitions, plus a single-minded sense of purpose, China is better prepared to remain in focus. Moreover, during its confrontation with the Soviet Union, the ideological context provided a clear route map to the US. This new Cold War with China, underpinning factor, it's not ideology though, but efficiency, meaning the capability shown by each of these two countries to outmatch the other in terms of results. In this sense, the US is hampered by the fact that its political system has become increasingly polarized and dysfunctional. Polarization has taken hold of the US political system, bringing down any possibility of international strategic consistency. In the past, the US was vertically divided by its multiple divisions. This was consistent with the anti-majoritarian nature of its political system. Sorry. Hello, can you listen to me?
Yes, we can. Yes, sir. Please. Sir.
Okay. No, I had a problem, but okay. So, but nowadays, these identities have merged. The political identities of the countries have merged with these divisions, generating two overwhelming majorities. These antagonistic majorities coexist side by side, demonizing each other, a dangerous horizontal split. It's detaching both its political system and its society as a whole. As a result, zigzagging becomes unavoidable. We can clearly see that Joe Biden's ascendancy to the White House will mean a different course of action, but nobody knows what will happen in 4 years' time. Probably President Biden will not be re-elected given his age, and as a result, we may even have Donald Trump back in the White House. So there is no strategic consistency under this extreme polarization in which the United States lives today. China, on the other hand, has defined a clear-cut objective, becoming number one by 2049. This not only strengthens the nationalistic resolves of its population and unifies the country under common banners, but provides a clear sense of direction. Quoting former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, and I quote, "China is marching towards its perception of its global destiny. It has a clear objective that the West has known." End of the quote. 3. The universality aptitude. This aptitude relates to a capability of projecting globally its own culture and values. This aptitude undoubtedly represents China's Achilles heel. True power and leadership for China would entail the possibility of giving shape to a Sino-centric world. However, this remains an immensely elusive goal for a country whose own culture has never been universal. The Chinese mind has always been interested in developing a Chinese civilization, not a global civilization. Much to the contrary, the US inherited the hegemonic torch from a country from which it also inherited language and civilization, the United Kingdom. As a result, during the last 2 centuries, the world has been dominated by Anglocentric content. Nothing similar has ever been seen in history. English is the closest thing to a lingua franca in the world. It's the common language spoken in the airports of the world. It's the global language of businesses. The world's most influential media is based either in the US or the UK. When aiming at global coverage, Chinese, Russian, or Qatari media resort to English language. The 10 highest ranking universities in the world are located in the US or the UK, and so on. Hence, from Shakespeare to the Gettysburg Address, from McDonald's to Facebook, from Marvel Comics to Harry Potter, from jazz to rock, from Hollywood to Netflix, the symbols of universal interconnection have been and still remain very much Anglocentric. Thousands of years of inward-looking self-satisfaction within a Great Wall mentality, on the other hand, imposed upon China a huge burden. Giving shape to a Sino-centric world with those characteristics is extremely difficult, if not totally impossible. Its civilization remains domestically encapsulated to a large extent, with only few expressions of it having attained true universality. China's sophisticated and potent civilization still remain unintelligible for most of the humanity, as does so as well its official language, the Mandarin. And the fact is that 500 Confucius institutes around the world trying to address this limitation are like a grain of sand within an immense beach. Fourth, the military aptitude. This aptitude relates to the capability of one of the parties to impose its will upon the other without going to war or to defeat it in a proper armed conflict. In 2030, China is expected to surpass the US GDP in absolute terms, while it already surpassed it in parity purchasing terms in 2014. As a result, China will be more and more on the winning side of the military budgetary competition. By 2050, China's economy will be much larger than America's, perhaps 3 times larger, according to some projections. As a result, China will be able to outspend US military budgets at will. However, while that moment arrives, China is circumventing the US military superiority by unconventional means. Let me explain. During the Cold War, the US was able to offset the Soviet Union's advantage in force size by maintaining a technological edge. Washington refused to pay the economic penalty of matching Moscow tank for tank or man for man. Instead, it aimed at confronting Soviet numerical superiority with a smaller but technologically superior army. In little more than 2 decades, the Chinese military have accomplished technological achievements that risk beating the US in its own game. Although it never called it that way, China decided to develop its own offset strategy, one that aims at overcoming the American technological advantages and superior military budget. The main element of this China's offset strategy has been based in becoming a asymmetric military superpower outside of the realm of conventional military power. Asymmetric weapons aim at destroying or render useless US sophisticated equipment and systems with weapons priced at just a fraction of their cost. It is the equivalent to the disruptive innovation that startups like Netflix, Uber, or Airbnb have used to upset previous dominant firms in those areas. Chinese military is indeed developing new technologies able to counter the US military superiority by a fraction of its cost. In terms of nuclear weapons on its part, the US enjoys of a clear superiority. However, yet again, China might be able to impose clear limits to that superiority. Two categories of nuclear weapons are herein involved: strategic and tactical. The first, with a much higher explosive power, target the adversary away from the war front and within its own territory. The second has a smaller explosive capacity and is designed to be used on battlefields. To counter America's overwhelming superiority in strategic nuclear weapons, China emphasizes a deterrent strategy which aims at making the cost of America's first use of them prohibitive, retaining the possibility of a retaliatory nuclear strike against the US major cities. Beijing imposes upon Washington the need to restrain itself in the use of its vastly superior nuclear arsenal. To such an end, China has developed highly mobile, land-based and submarine-based nuclear ballistic missiles, which are extremely difficult to locate and to destroy, and hence may allow for a retaliatory nuclear strike. China's DF-41 and GL-3 intercontinental ballistic missiles are a good proof of this. On the other hand, China's conventional ballistic missiles, which are an important part of its asymmetrical arsenal, are capable to match the impact of America's tactical nuclear weapons. The DF-26 missiles are a good example of this. As a result, US superiority in nuclear weapons may turn out to be more theoretical than effective. 5. The economic aptitude. This aptitude relates to the capability of sustaining a higher GDP growth. China clearly surpasses the US in this field, and this doesn't require much explanation. In December 1978, China's open door policy put in motion a historic process that has lifted 800 million Chinese out of poverty. During those 41 years, China's GDP grew at an average rate of 10%. In 2019, China's GDP grew 6.2%. However, Beijing has embraced this slower economic growth as the new normal. China's slowdown has to be put in perspective, though. First, China's growth of 6.2% in 2019 allowed it to add to its GDP the equivalent to the entire Australian economy, which is the world's number 13. Second, a magnitude of growth of around 6.5% should be enough to double China's GDP for the decade of 2010-2020. Conversely, since the early 1970s, the US growth has slipped under 3% per annum, decelerating further to under 2% since 2000. If so, and amid divergent growing curves, China should have become a much larger economy by 2040. Based on several estimates, Robert Vogel mentions that in 2040, China's GDP could be almost 3 times bigger than that of the US, with a 40% share of the global GDP versus a 14% share of America's global, of the US. 6. The technological aptitude. This refers to the capability of to obtain primacy in a group of key emerging technologies. Where does the US stand in relation to China in this field? The answer admits no doubt as number one. As a technological superpower whose commanding status China wants to emulate and surpass. China, however, this gap between the US and China is closing at amazing speed. An independent American task force admitted as much, and I quote, China is investing significant resources in developing new technologies, and after 2020 and after 2030, it will likely be the world's largest spender on research and development. China is closing the technological gap with the US. And though it may not match US capabilities across the board, it will soon be a leading power in key technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics, energy storage, fifth-generation cellular networks, quantum technology, and biotechnology. End of the quote. Indeed, while the US leads the world in research and development expenditures, China retains the second place. However, since 2000, China's spending in research and development has increased 18% annually, whereas America's only grew 4% during the same period. China and the US are in direct competition in several key technological areas, with both parties enjoying of particular advantages within this process. Although China cannot aspire as yet to overcome the US technological superiority overall, the technologies in which they are competing have immense repercussion, and each of them has a multiplier effect over other technologies. In these areas, we can mention artificial intelligence, fifth generation cellular networks, superconductors, quantum information systems, space control, etc. At the end of the day, this struggle for technological supremacy is dependent on the efficiency of two very different technological development models: the state-guided and funded one and the market-oriented one. While China follows the first, the US follows the second. China has focused state-led efforts and investments on ensuring that science, technology, and innovation propel the country as a fundamental growth engine. At the same time, the state in China has set ambitious targets in technological capability building in a range of specific sectors. At the same time, it has stimulated private sector and venture capital efforts in this area, guiding them toward a set of strategic goals. More than that, targeted technological priorities defined by the states are getting directly both the energy and the funding from public to private, and from the national level to the state and municipal levels. In other words, a multiplier effect concentrated in key areas is providing China with a tremendous technological boost. Meanwhile, the state directs a large percentage of its annual budgets toward education, with science and technology as its main priority. All of this has led to an explosive growth in scientific output. The United States, as yet the leading technological superpower, has a market-oriented approach to technology. The private sector, on whose hand technology generation relies, focuses solely on assessing the returns of any investments, that any investments are high enough to justify the risks. Both companies and both companies and venture capitalists see economic reward as the only consideration for technological new developments. When judging the merits of new investments, profits in the short or medium term are the only consideration to bear in mind. Moreover, private research and development has increasingly turned away from basic scientific research and focus on applied one. This means emphasizing commercially oriented products development at the expense of capital-intensive long-run research projects. Innovation, as a consequence, is becoming more incremental and less able to produce technological breakthroughs. Curiously enough, the US technological system would not be what it is today had the state not acted as a catalyst for development. This was the model that prevailed until a few decades ago, a period when breakthrough inventions paved the ground for what Silicon Valley and other high-tech American counterparts are today. Indeed, this became particularly relevant after the so-called Sputnik moment, meaning the American shock resulting from the Soviets launching of the first ever satellite to orbit Earth. According to NASA's estimates, at least 2,000 products or services were helped into development and commercialization as a result of the scientific research that took place during that period. Nowadays, the private sector has virtually become the sole force in guarding the U.S. high-tech fortress against China's formidable challenge. However, private sector in the U.S. is very much under the inquisitive and regulatory framework led by the federal government. So the Chinese, as we can see, have become the best pupils in following the textbook of America's innovation success story in the decades that followed World War II. Although hampered by its nationalistic excesses, the route map in science, technology, and innovation looks much more coherent and holistic than the one being followed by the United States. China has the ability to undertake costly long-term path-breaking projects and see them through successful completion, a capability that the US seems to have lost. Conclusion. After comparing the aforementioned 6 aptitudes, it is possible to have a better understanding of the power correlation between both countries. China stands better than the US in relation to the convergence and the strategic aptitudes. Conversely, the US is much better placed than China in relation to the universality aptitude. On the other hand, although the US still prevails in the military, economic, and technological aptitudes, reverse trends in motion point in China's direction. All of the above leads to the conclusion that although China may have brought onto itself many unnecessary problems by challenging the US too openly, it did not act prematurely. In other words, at this point in time, the US does not seem to have the capability to revert China's ascendancy in any meaningful way. Moreover, by openly challenging the US, China strengthens the nationalistic resolve of its population, providing a boost and a clear sense of direction for the attainment of those strategies. It is thus possible that after having assessed cost and benefits, the Chinese Communist Party may have concluded that the benefits of acting openly and decisively outweighed at the cost of overtly challenging the US. What are the options? Do I have how many more minutes?
2 or 3 minutes, and then we can start the question and answer session.
Okay, fine. What are the options that I can resolve from this emergent Cold War? According to my book, there are 5 possibilities that may emerge as a result. 1, America's containment of China, the policy which has been followed until now by the US, that is the containment of China's emergency. Second, power sharing, that is a power sharing agreement between the 2 superpowers. Third, war. Of course, the book studies the different kind of wars that may emerge. Would it be a two-sided situation in which the leading superpower triggers war when it can still win it, or it will be a power transition power situation in which it is normally the emerging power, the one that triggers a war because it feels that it's been asphyxiated in its possibility of emerging. The fourth possibility will be America's withdrawal. America may simply withdraw and enter into a new isolationist period. And finally, the collapse of the Chinese Communist Party regime. So my book studies all these different options and weights them vis-a-vis what the future may bring as a result of this new Cold War. This is essentially a synthesis of what the book says. Thank you.